Pam Bondi walked into the courtroom with the confidence of a seasoned attorney, her presence commanding attention even before she spoke a single word. She had spent years mastering the nuances of the law, navigating complex cases, and standing firm in the face of opposition. This day was no different, except for one unexpected turn of events that would challenge her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Dressed in a professional suit, she took her seat at the counsel's table, ready to argue a case she had prepared for extensively. The courtroom was filled with spectators, some of whom had followed her legal career closely. The case itself was not particularly controversial, but the atmosphere had an unusual tension, as if something was about to unfold that would shift the focus from legal arguments to a matter far more personal. As the proceedings began, the judge scanned the room, his gaze resting on Pam for a moment longer than necessary. Then, without warning, he addressed her directly, pointing out that she was wearing a small gold cross around her neck. The room fell silent as his words cut through the usual formalities of the courtroom. He stated that wearing religious symbols in court was inappropriate and that she would need to remove it immediately. Pam, taken aback but composed, instinctively touched the delicate chain resting against her collarbone. It was a simple cross, one she had worn for years without issue. Never before had she been asked to remove it in a professional setting. Her initial instinct was to question the request, but before she could, the judge continued, making it clear that failure to comply would result in a fine. A murmur spread through the courtroom as those present exchanged glances, recognizing the unusual nature of the demand. Lawyers and spectators alike had seen individuals wear jewelry, symbols, and even pins reflecting personal beliefs or affiliations without incident. Yet, here was a seasoned attorney, singled out in a manner that felt unjust. Pam took a deep breath, her legal mind already at work. She knew the law well enough to recognize that such a directive raised serious constitutional questions. Freedom of religious expression was a foundational right, protected by legal precedents she had studied extensively. If she removed the cross, she would be conceding to an order that, in her view, had no valid legal basis. If she refused, she risked not only the fine but also potential repercussions that could impact her case and professional standing. She chose to stand her ground. With measured words, she respectfully inquired about the specific rule or statute that prohibited religious symbols in the courtroom. Her tone remained calm, professional, and unwavering. The judge, caught off guard by her immediate challenge, hesitated for a fraction of a second before stating that the courtroom had an expectation of neutrality and professionalism, which he claimed her cross disrupted. Pam, fully aware of the weight of the moment, responded by citing legal precedents that protected individuals from discrimination based on religious expression. She explained that unless a symbol actively disrupted proceedings or was used in an overtly political manner, there was no legitimate legal basis for restricting its presence. Her argument was not just about herself, it was about ensuring that no individual, regardless of their faith, was forced to choose between their profession and their beliefs. The judge, clearly displeased, insisted that she either remove the cross or accept the financial penalty. The fine was imposed swiftly, a clear attempt to assert authority over the situation. Pam met his gaze without flinching, her silence a statement in itself. She did not reach for the chain, did not move to comply. Instead, she accepted the fine without protest, knowing that the legal battle ahead would be far more significant than the immediate penalty. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Some looked on with admiration, recognizing her quiet defiance as a stand for something greater than a piece of jewelry. Others whispered among themselves, aware that this was not just an isolated incident, but a moment that could set a precedent. Legal professionals in the room began considering the implications. If this order stood unchallenged, what would it mean for others who wished to express their faith in a non-disruptive manner? Pam knew she had made the right decision. This was not just about her personal beliefs, but about the fundamental rights that legal professionals and all citizens were entitled to. She had spent her career defending the principles of justice, and she wasn't about to stop now. The fine was merely the beginning of a much larger conversation, one that would challenge the boundaries of authority and the protection of individual freedoms within the legal system. Pam Bondi sat at the council's table, her mind sharp and focused despite the unexpected turn the morning had taken. The fine she had just received for wearing a small cross around her neck was more than just an inconvenience. It was a direct challenge to a fundamental principle she had spent her career defending. She knew the law well, and she recognized immediately that this was not just about a piece of jewelry. This was about something much larger, something that touched the core of constitutional protections and personal freedoms. She took a moment to gather her thoughts, aware that every move she made from this point forward would be scrutinized. Her years of experience in the legal field had prepared her for battles inside the courtroom, but this was not the kind of argument she had anticipated making today. Still, she was ready. If the law was on her side, and she was certain it was, she would not back down. Standing, she adjusted the papers before her, though her mind was already assembling the legal reasoning she needed. She knew that the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protected the free exercise of religion, preventing the government from imposing restrictions on religious expression unless there was a compelling reason to do so. More importantly, she understood that legal precedent had consistently upheld the right of individuals to wear religious symbols in public spaces, including government buildings, so long as it did not interfere with the proceedings. With a steady voice, she raised her objection, asking for clarification on the legal basis for the fine. The response given was vague, citing the need for neutrality in the courtroom. Pam, however, was well aware that neutrality did not mean the forced suppression of individual identity. She explained that religious expression was a protected right, and that her wearing a cross did not constitute an endorsement of religion by the court itself. The distinction was crucial. As she spoke, she referenced key legal cases that had addressed similar issues, including landmark decisions where courts had ruled in favor of individuals whose personal expressions of faith had been challenged. These cases made it clear that unless a symbol was used in a way that actively disrupted legal proceedings or created a conflict of interest, there was no legitimate reason to demand its removal. Her voice remained calm, professional, and unwavering as she laid out the argument. The tension in the courtroom grew as she continued, her words making it increasingly clear that the fine imposed upon her was not supported by any substantial legal justification. She pointed out that other forms of personal expression, whether cultural, political, or ideological, had been tolerated in courtrooms without issue. If those were allowed, then singling out religious symbols set a dangerous precedent, one that could have far-reaching consequences. She then turned to the concept of selective enforcement. If no clear rule prohibited religious symbols in the courtroom, then why was she being fined for wearing a cross? Was this an isolated decision, or was there an established policy that had been applied consistently? If such a policy existed, where was the legal documentation supporting it? These questions, raised methodically and deliberately, put the burden of justification on those attempting to enforce the penalty. A hush fell over the room as she continued to press for answers. Legal observers in attendance recognized the significance of the argument she was making. It wasn't just about one person's right to wear a symbol of faith. It was about ensuring that personal freedoms were not eroded under the guise of neutrality. The Constitution did not allow the government to dictate when and how a person could express their faith, so long as it did not interfere with the rights of others or the function of the court. Her argument gained momentum as she explained that, if the fine was allowed to stand, it could set a precedent that would justify further restrictions on religious expression. Would others be fined for wearing a hijab, a yarmulke, a turban? Would lawyers, jurors, or even witnesses be forced to remove symbols of personal belief before participating in legal proceedings? The implications were profound, and everyone in the room could see it. As she finished her statement, her posture remained firm, her gaze steady. She had not raised her voice, nor had she displayed any outward frustration. Instead, she had done what she did best. She had used the law itself to expose the weakness in the reasoning against her. She had not asked for special treatment, only for the equal application of rights guaranteed to every citizen. And in doing so, she had turned a seemingly minor penalty into a major constitutional debate. The situation in the courtroom had already escalated beyond what anyone had expected. What had started as a seemingly routine legal proceeding had transformed into a debate over constitutional rights, personal freedoms, and the boundaries of judicial authority. Pam Bondi had challenged the fine imposed on her for wearing a small cross, presenting a well-reasoned argument based on legal precedents and constitutional protections. Her defense was logical, rooted in established law, and backed by a firm understanding of fundamental rights. Yet, rather than addressing her argument with a sound legal response, an even more drastic step was taken. A formal complaint was filed against her. This action was not about the fine anymore. It was an attempt to suppress her stance through legal means. The complaint alleged that she had disrupted the courtroom's order and professionalism by refusing to comply with a directive that, in her view, lacked any legal basis. The implication was clear. Rather than debating the validity of the fine or addressing the constitutional questions she had raised, those in power had chosen to shift the focus onto her conduct, portraying her as the problem instead of acknowledging the broader issue at hand. This maneuver was not unexpected. Pam had spent years in the legal profession and understood that when individuals in authority felt their decisions were being challenged, they sometimes resorted to bureaucratic measures rather than substantive discussion. But she also knew that this approach often backfired, especially when the public took notice. As word of the complaint spread, legal experts, journalists, and commentators began weighing in. Questions arose about whether the response was proportionate to the situation. Was it reasonable to escalate a minor infraction into a formal disciplinary action? More importantly, what message did it send about the ability of legal professionals to express their faith without fear of reprisal? The media quickly picked up on the story, drawing national attention to the case. Articles were written dissecting the legal arguments she had presented. Prominent attorneys and constitutional scholars discussed the implications of penalizing someone for wearing a religious symbol in a courtroom. Debates were held on news programs about whether such actions violated the principles of religious freedom and free expression. Even those who did not personally share her beliefs saw the danger in a system where personal expression could be penalized without a clear and justifiable reason. The pressure intensified as organizations dedicated to protecting civil liberties became involved. Advocacy groups specializing in constitutional law issued statements condemning the handling of the situation. Religious freedom organizations highlighted the potential consequences of allowing such a precedent to stand. Social media amplified the discussion, with people from various backgrounds expressing concern over what they saw as an unjustified attempt to silence someone who had merely asserted her rights. Within legal circles, many professionals took note of how the situation had been mishandled. Lawyers understood the importance of courtroom decorum, but they also recognized that penalizing someone for quietly wearing a religious symbol did not constitute a disruption of legal proceedings. Judges, attorneys, and scholars debated whether this case signaled a broader trend toward limiting religious expression in professional settings. Pam, for her part, remained composed. She had no intention of letting the complaint deter her from continuing to stand by the principles she had defended throughout her career. If anything, the escalation reinforced her belief that the issue needed to be addressed head-on. The attempt to turn the focus onto her conduct rather than the legal questions at hand only strengthened her resolve. Legal filings and appeals followed, ensuring that the complaint would not go unchallenged. The more attention the case received, the more apparent it became that the real issue was not her actions, but the broader implications of restricting personal expression in court. The growing public discourse made it increasingly difficult for those who had initiated the complaint to justify their position. The case had gained national attention, sparking debates in legal circles, the media, and among civil rights organizations. What had begun as a simple fine for wearing a small cross in the courtroom had evolved into a larger discussion about judicial overreach and the fundamental rights of individuals within the legal system. The attempt to penalize an attorney for quietly expressing her faith had backfired, turning the situation into a constitutional debate that extended beyond the courtroom walls. As more people learned about what had happened, legal experts weighed in on the implications of punishing someone for wearing a religious symbol. constitutional scholars cited well-established precedents protecting the right to religious expression, especially when it did not interfere with proceedings or disrupt the function of the court. Many pointed out that the issue was not just about a single case, but about the broader implications of allowing judicial authority to be used in a way that selectively restricted personal freedoms. The public response was overwhelming. Some saw the decision to impose a fine as an overreach, an attempt to assert control rather than uphold the law. Others argued that enforcing such a penalty without a clear legal basis set a dangerous precedent that could be used to limit expressions of faith, culture, or identity in other professional settings. The conversation expanded beyond the legal field, drawing in advocates for religious freedom, civil liberties groups, and ordinary citizens concerned about the implications of allowing personal beliefs to be policed in such a manner. The pushback against the ruling was swift. Appeals were filed, challenging the legitimacy of the fine and questioning whether any established rule had actually been violated. Legal organizations and civil rights groups began monitoring the case closely, recognizing its potential to influence future decisions regarding religious expression in professional environments. The more the case was examined, the more it became clear that the justification for the penalty was weak. No existing rule explicitly prohibited religious symbols in the courtroom, and no evidence suggested that wearing a cross had disrupted the proceedings in any way. With increasing scrutiny, pressure mounted to acknowledge that the decision had been an overreach. Public discussion shifted from whether a religious symbol should be allowed in court to whether judges should have unchecked authority to impose penalties based on personal interpretations of decorum. Many legal professionals argued that a courtroom should uphold the law, not arbitrarily restrict rights that were clearly protected by the Constitution. The turning point came when legal experts and advocacy groups began discussing the broader implications of allowing such actions to go unchallenged. If one attorney could be penalized for wearing a cross, what would prevent others from facing similar consequences for expressing their beliefs in subtle ways? Would legal professionals be forced to remove any sign of personal or religious identity before stepping into a courtroom? The slippery slope was evident, and the case became a rallying point for those who believed in protecting constitutional rights from unnecessary restrictions. The legal battle continued, but the momentum had shifted. The more attention the case received, the clearer it became that the attempt to penalize religious expression was both legally questionable and publicly unpopular. What had started as an attempt to enforce a specific interpretation of professionalism had turned into a broader discussion about the limits of judicial authority and the importance of upholding fundamental freedoms. As discussions continued, the case set a precedent for future debates on personal expression in professional settings. It had become more than just a question of one attorney's right to wear a cross. It had become a defining moment in the ongoing conversation about individual rights, legal boundaries, and the principles that the justice system was meant to uphold. The case had grown far beyond its original scope, evolving into a national debate about the balance between judicial authority and individual rights. What had started as a simple fine had transformed into a defining legal moment, one that forced courts, legal professionals, and the public to reconsider the boundaries of personal expression within the justice system. As the legal battle progressed, it became clear that the attempt to suppress a religious symbol had backfired. The constitutional arguments presented were sound, supported by legal precedents that protected religious expression in public spaces. The overwhelming public response further reinforced that the issue was not about a single person or a single courtroom. It was about the broader implications of allowing unchecked authority to dictate what could and could not be expressed in professional settings. The backlash against the ruling demonstrated that people were not willing to accept arbitrary limitations on personal freedoms, especially when those limitations were imposed without a clear legal foundation. The conversation shifted from questioning whether religious symbols belonged in the courtroom to questioning whether judges should have the power to enforce penalties based on subjective interpretations of decorum. It became evident that maintaining professionalism in the legal system did not require the suppression of personal identity. Legal professionals across the country took note of the case, recognizing its significance in shaping future policies regarding personal expression in the Courtroom. Advocacy groups continued to push for stronger protections against similar restrictions, ensuring that no individual, whether attorney, witness, or juror, would be forced to choose between their profession and their beliefs. The case served as a reminder that the justice system must uphold the rights of all individuals rather than selectively enforcing rules that erode constitutional protections. In the end, the situation highlighted the importance of standing firm in the face of injustice. What could have been a minor incident turned into a pivotal moment for defending religious freedom and personal expression. It reinforced the idea that the law should protect, not suppress, the rights of those who operate within its framework. The Sierra case would go down as an example of why vigilance is necessary when it comes to preserving fundamental freedoms. It proved that even within the legal system, challenges to personal rights can arise in unexpected ways, and that those who are willing to stand their ground can influence not just their own circumstances, but the broader legal landscape. And the bigger impact of the case would be felt for years to come, serving as a precedent for future discussions on the intersection of law, individual rights, and judicial authority.